I've worked in the AI space for 35 years in one way or the other. And so I'm a huge proponent, but this is the one area where AI is a tool and not the leader, which is wisdom.
AI is really good at knowledge. It's really good at helping you find knowledge. It can even give you knowledge, but it certainly can't give you wisdom.
And doing something with knowledge as opposed to just memorizing it is the difference between accumulating facts, which I'll say is the AI world, and wisdom, which is the domain of humans.
All of the virtues have to be seen as verbs and not nouns. Like, you don't have courage, you have to act with courage. Discipline is a thing that you do. Justice is a thing that you give, not a thing that you get.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
It's funny, my agent and my editor practically dropped me over it. Like, they did not want me to do this. But you can't let
Sure.
let these people dictate what you think is an important project.
See, I think if you had done a physical book with Charlemagne, I would definitely know that it exists. And I just had zero idea that this happened. But that happens more and more. There's huge shows I've never even heard of.
Yeah, I think content in general has become so fragmented. And like, you remember like 10, 15 years ago, if you made great content, everybody would know about it. Like,
Sure.
you would be on Twitter, you would get a following on Twitter, people would read your content. But now if you make great content, usually it's very niche driven. Your niche, your subculture might know about it, but nobody else will know about it.
Well, the interesting thing is, yeah, it might be much less popular, but the economics of it might be much better. Like, there are Substacks that are actually providing decent livings for people that I've never heard of. I never see any of their writing because it doesn't get spread around. And yet they might actually be financially thriving in a way that they weren't 10 or 15 years ago. So it's like the economics are better, but the reach is smaller.
Well, this is an interesting thing because, and this relates to your book, this relates to the idea of wisdom, which is that I don't think, and by the way, I'm the biggest proponent of AI. I love AI. I think people are only just now seeing the potential of it. I've worked in the AI space for 35 years in one way or the other. And so I'm a huge proponent, but this is the one area where AI is a tool and not the leader, which is wisdom. Like, you cannot, AI can only learn from the past, and it's great at summarizing, and it's great at communicating the past, and it's great at coming up with new ways of presenting things from the past, but it's not going to operate from first principles and come up with ideas that are hard to define as wisdom. Wisdom is a hard metric to say, yes, this is wisdom, this isn't wisdom. And I think when there's hard metrics, AI has problems.
Well, AI is really good at knowledge. It's really good at helping you find knowledge. It can even give you knowledge, but it certainly can't give you wisdom. What I think is really interesting about AI is, obviously I use it as well. I think anyone that sort of instinctively rejects new tools or technologies without actually having messed with them, that's a form of like anti-wisdom. Like, oh no, I know the best way to do things. I don't even want to try. I hate that attitude. But I do find that if I don't know what I'm looking for, and I don't have a good sense of like a ballpark sense of right and wrong, like, not morally, but just like correct and incorrect, AI is a really dangerous tool to mess with, or a really unreliable tool to mess with. But if I'm trying to track something down that I know exists, it can be extremely helpful. Does that make sense? Like, if I've read a book and there's something in that book that I can't quite remember, but I need help nailing down, AI is great. But if I actually asked it to like teach me what's in a book, I find that it does a very poor job.
Yeah, it does a very poor job. And why is that? Why are the summaries that AI does basically at a first grade level? And
Sure.
and I mean that very seriously. Like, there's the Fisher-Kincaid score, which tells you, given a piece of writing, what grade level it is. And kind of the ideal is 5th or 6th grade, actually. Ernest Hemingway's Old Man and the
Yeah.
Sea was at a 5th grade or 6th grade level. And then you understand it. 12th grade level's too hard usually for people to understand. But AI does a first grade level job of explanation, and that's never good enough.
Well, look, like the facts of the old man and the sea are not what makes it a powerful and important
Right.
piece of literature, right? It's stylistically obviously brilliant as well, but it's the showing, not the telling, that makes literature what it is. And so, a summary of a book of philosophy or a summary of a historical era is not really the point. It's immersing yourself in it for an extended period of time. It's the actual coming to know it on a deeper and more profound level that is the sort of whole point. There's a story I tell actually in the beginning of the wisdom book that I think sort of illustrates this point. And I think it goes to the idea of how timeless this is. So, Seneca tells this story 2,000 years ago about this wealthy Roman who wants to seem really smart. So he purchases these really smart slaves. Each one's like an expert in a different Greek writer or poet. And they just whisper in his ears all the things that he needs to know to sound smart at a party. And then one of the people comes up to him and says, you're so smart. Have you thought about becoming a wrestler? This is a guy who sees through the act that the guy is trying to pull off. The guy goes, why would I be a wrestler? I'm an old man. And he says, yeah, but your slaves are still young. His point is, you really can't have anyone do this for you. It's the knowledge of that poetry or that literature. It's not the recall that's important. It's not the memorization that's important. It's actually the process of engaging with it over a long period of time. That's like the whole point. And so when I say wisdom takes work, I really do actually mean that, like, the work is the important part and the wisdom is the byproduct of that work. Like I'm doing this right now. Like I'm writing a book right now and I'm working with a research assistant, but I'm finding that I still have to do the vast majority of the reading and the thinking and the spending time with the materials, or else I can't just read summaries from someone else. I have, or I don't know and feel it deeply enough to really do the work.
Yeah, and I feel like this is a theme throughout the book, that the verb do is really important, to do something. Like when you talk about this, even early on with Montaigne, how so many of his peers in school would just read and then be tested on the knowledge and have perfect answers, but you could be asked questions. How would you use this knowledge?
Yeah.
And doing something with knowledge as opposed to just memorizing it is the difference between accumulating facts, which I'll say is the AI world, and wisdom, which is the domain of humans. Humans will have wisdom, and just to relate this back to the Substack aspect, people are making money now by basically providing subscription access to their wisdom in certain niches.
Sure.
Wisdom that the AI cannot get, which is why I'm willing to pay for someone's knowledge, usually earned through experience, or either experience or passion. So passion, when you said immersion, it's another way of saying passion. Someone has to be passionate enough to be immersed in the crevices, in the nuances of a subculture.
That's exactly right. I think all the virtues, this is a point that goes back to Aristotle, all of the virtues have to be seen as verbs and not nouns. Like, you don't have courage, you have to act with courage. Discipline is a thing that you do. Justice is a thing that you give, not a thing that you get, right? And then wisdom too, it's not this like, oh, you're old, therefore you have wisdom, right? Like, wisdom is a methodology, a process. The byproduct is that you have perspective and you kind of have a sense of how things go. I'll give you an example on this book I'm working on now.
What's the topic of the book?
I'm writing a biography of Admiral Stockdale right now. And so one of the sections, I needed to talk about how many graduates of the Naval Academy had died in the Second World War. And so I asked ChatGPT, like whatever the latest one was, this was a couple months ago, but I said, how many graduates of the Naval Academy died in World War II? And it goes, okay, let me tell you and I'll show you my work. And it says, okay, so the death rate of service members from the Academy during the Second World War was 7%. And then it said roughly 7,500 people graduated from the Academy between 1940 and 1945. Therefore, 7,500 times 7%, it was like 400 and something. And I was like, look, I appreciate you showing me your work, but your work is bullshit. Like you just multiplied two totally unrelated variables.
Right.
The 7% of service members who died in the war has no bearing on the fact that 7,500 graduates graduated between 1940 and 1945. In fact, I think like 70 classes, this is another statistic I already know, something like 70 classes had served in the war in some capacity. Like it was a huge number. 70 is too big. It was a very large number, right?
It's at least going to be 30 or 40.
Yeah, exactly. It was an extremely large number, right? Because a bunch of people were born in the 1800s served in World War II, right? So I knew these numbers were I knew this math was totally wrong. By the way, I also didn't ask it to estimate. I told it to tell me exactly how many, because this is a statistic. And not only do I know it's a statistic, it knows it's a statistic, or it couldn't have told me 7% of service members from the academy had died in the war. So it actually took a number that, if it traced it back, it would have found the actual number. And then it did this weird calculation, right? I know this is a fact because this would be in the records of the VA, right? Like the Department of Defense would have records of how many people. And then you want to know how I solved this problem? It was pretty not multi-billion-dollar data centers and all this advanced computing. There's a plaque at the Naval Academy that lists every person from the academy who died in the war, and I just counted the names on the plaque, right? Like I found a picture of the plaque and then I counted the names. And so it's not just like sometimes it's bad at solving things. Like sometimes it's so smart, and I think this is true in sometimes it's sort of dispensation to calculate things or use this computing power it has, actually overshoots and misses somewhat lower tech solutions to straightforward problems.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like there's two categories of people around the so-called wisdom or knowledge of AI, which is there's the category that says AI is bad. It's ultimately going to veer in this evil direction. It's going to take all the jobs. It's not going to give us good guidance, and we're going to rely too much on it. So there's that category.
Yeah.
Then there's the category of people who 100% believe AI is going to solve everything.
Yes.
And neither category is correct.
Sure.
Just like the computer is a tool. Yes, the computer can do things that humans can never, ever do and will never be able to do. But it's just a tool. It's not going to run the world. We're going to run the world using them. But it's like in this case, you had to use your own common sense to do something that the AI would never do. And I think people, you mentioned throughout the book too, there's various, it's hard to define wisdom because wisdom's almost like a recursive, definition. Like,
yeah.
Wisdom is for people who say they're not wise. It's the sort of definition of wisdom.
Going back to Socrates. Yeah.
And you say that, basically you kind of have to admit that you don't know everything in order to have the opportunity to know everything, and in order to have the opportunity to be wise. And I think that's a theme throughout the book as well.
Well, and look,
and AI thinks it knows everything. It just doesn't even know to not know everything.
I was just going to say that's actually where AI is particularly bad. Is obviously I've used it to do lots of different queries over the last couple of years. It has never once said it doesn't know the answer. It's given me a lot of really shitty answers. It has never once given me the answer, and almost never does it ask for more information that would help it get better answers, right? So this is ironically a very human thing, which is our sense of knowing or our confidence that we can figure stuff out actually makes things much harder for us. And the ability to say, I don't know, or that I'm confused, or to come back and request better specifications or more details or some context actually helps us do what we do. And so the thing about wisdom is that I think it's hard exactly to define. It's sort of it when you see it. It tends to be obvious in other people. It shouldn't be so obvious in yourself. Like if you confidently think you have wisdom, that's alarming. And then there is no one who is so wise that they can't learn more. That is, I think, something we should all be able to agree on, that even the wisest person has wisdom left for them to learn, even if that wisdom is just knowing more about themselves, right? Because how many really smart, even wise people would we say are truly self-aware? Not many.
Yeah, and look, not anybody in every situation is self-aware. Like basically
Yes.
all people are not self-aware in some situations. And I think that's your point, is that almost a prerequisite to learning something new is being able to admit, oh, I'm not smart or knowledgeable or wise in this area. And one thing I've noticed, like, how old are your kids right now?
My oldest is about to turn 9, and then my youngest is 6.
So, by the way, that's the best ages from
It's
like
so
6
fun.
to 12 are like by far the best ages. But I'm also realizing that above 20 starts to get to be the best ages again.
Sure.
And my kids are in their 20s. And sometimes I find myself arguing them with about things, and then they argue back, and then I'm defending. But at some point, always in these arguments, I realize, you know, I actually know jack shit about what I'm talking about right now. Like, and that's only been something that's happened recently, maybe because my kids are of age where they can argue with me like this. But like so many times I realize, oh, I'm arguing about something I really don't know anything at all about. I don't even know if the facts I'm saying are actual facts. I'm not saying this is wisdom or not, but I think becoming aware of when you don't know something and this is only true for me in like the last 5 years. This is like a key aspect to my own growth.
Yeah, well, my favorite line from Epictetus is it's impossible to learn that which you think you already know. So ego is this sort of real antidote to wisdom because it prevents us from knowing things. But yeah, I think weirdly though, the more you know, the less attached you should become to the idea that you know, and the more you're comfortable with letting other people think they know. Like there's this great Tom Segura bit that I think about all the time. And he said, that since he became a parent, he just doesn't have time to argue with people anymore. So someone comes up and tells him stuff. He's like, sure, you're right. Like, and to me, that's actually, someone might go, oh, that person's weak-willed or stupid that they're just like accepting all these things that other people tell them. I think there's actually quite a bit of wisdom in that because you realize what's actually valuable is your time and your peace of mind. And so you're much less insistent in having stupid fights with people about things that don't matter and that you don't care about. And again, this is actually something the Stoics talk about, that one of the signs of approaching wisdom is that you just get in fewer arguments. Not because you're right all the time, but you just don't give a shit about being right.
That reminds me of all these memes on the internet. It's a picture of a guy driving home from a date, and he's thinking that date didn't go well at all, but at least now she knows that rent control is evil.
Yes.
So,
Or just those videos of like dudes like forcefully explaining things to women, and like the woman is not just physically threatened but so profoundly uninterested in what the person has to say, but he needs to say it. I think that is as you get older and you get a little bit more confident in yourself, you just cringe at that because all the times you have been that person who just needed somebody else. It's not that you needed them to know something. It's that you needed them to know that you knew something. And that is, about as foolish as it gets.
well, how much of wisdom then do you think is a function of age? Because, obviously we have much more experience as we get older and we're
Yeah.
able to process that versus younger people. But even the brain, Arthur Brooks points this out, the brain changes so
Sure.
that your raw ability to just calculate is gone, but you have this wisdom supposedly. How much do you
Hopefully.
think? Yeah, hopefully that's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a lot of stupid old people too. So I think it is necessary but not sufficient for wisdom, right? There's a Churchill line that I think about that I think captures a lot of people's lives, young and old. But he was talking about Chamberlain, and he said, whenever Chamberlain stumbled over the truth, he picked himself up and carried on as if nothing had happened. And I think a lot of people go through life that way, which is that they have experiences and they are being exposed to the things that time and age expose you to. But because they think they already know, or because they're too self-conscious, or because they're too dense, or whatever it is, they don't learn the lesson. They just carry on. Then they learn the lesson. They get taught the lesson again and again and again and again. And so I think there are some things that only time and experience can teach you. But just because time and experience are saying them to you doesn't mean that you have to hear them.
And you point out in the book the importance of having an open mind. And I think all
Yeah.
of us feel like we're open minded. I feel like a symptom of non wisdom is when you're trying desperately to hold on to some structure or idea you believed in that you just don't want to let go of. Like, so you give the example of Louis Agassiz,
Yeah.
who's arguing against Darwin, and he just won't accept. There's really no facts in the argument. Like
Yeah.
it's very hard to prove these ideas in evolution. But Louis Agassiz is so kind of genius guy, right? Was at Harvard, presumably had many
Yeah.
accolades in his youth for being smart and wise or whatever. But ultimately, he succumbs to this inability to accept change and Darwin's new ideas.
I think you see this a lot with really smart academics is that it's not even just that like, hey, I'm set in my ways. It's like there's an element of professional jealousy or grievance. So I think a big part of it is it's like, wait, no, I'm the smartest biologist and naturalist in the world. How can this guy across the Atlantic have upended everything that I was supposed to matter about? So I think psychoanalyzing him a little bit, I think part of it was just resistance to ceding the top of the field to someone else or to a new school of thought. And I think we see this quite often where it's a lowercase c conservatism. So not political, but just in the sense of like, well, I don't want to have to change my worldview in which I'm no longer the preeminent or the dominant or the main guy. And so I'm not only not going to accept it, I'm going to actively resist it because there's like an energy and an excitement to being sort of the dissenter against it.
Yeah, and also it's this, like you say, this inability to seed that a next generation is coming.
Yes.
And I think a key part of wisdom must be able to take on a new role in your own life where you enjoy to see the next generation surpass you. Like it's not just like accepting it, but enjoying it and learning from it. Like again, being open to learning new things even after everyone's already told you you're the smartest in the world.
Yeah, I was actually talking to this woman I know, she's 95, and I was complimenting her that it's not that she was still young in the sense that she was active, but she was like still interested in like new things that were happening, like she's not just watching the news all day being angry. She was aware of what was happening culturally and curious about it, right? And I think that's wisdom, not needing for everything to stay the same and for your role in them to stay the same. There's kind of a fragility there that I think is quite understandable. I mean, it would be hard at 90 years old or 80 years old or even 50 years old if you were used to sort of driving things to have to accept that the game has changed or the situation has changed or the world has changed and the way that it once was is not how it is anymore. That can be really challenging for people.
I mean, maybe accepting change is a key aspect of wisdom. A lot of times you get into something, you get into a situation and you think it must be this way always. Like
Yeah.
whether it's a marriage or a business partnership, a friendship, or I think about this. This happens a lot in business. Like, okay, we're doing this. It's got to work, or else.
Yeah.
But being able to be flexible and change, transform your ideas, transform your partnerships, and doing it in a way that's congenial to everybody and doesn't involve lawsuits and stuff. I think this is a key aspect of wisdom too. Like just personal relationships.
Totally. I mean, like, look, somebody came of age when the sort of business culture was X. Well, now business culture is Y, and your insistence on, well, that's not the way we used to do it is kind of pathetic, I think. The irony that the Stoics would point out is like, whatever the status quo that you're trying to preserve is, it hasn't always been that way, right? Like if you study history even a little bit, you realize this thing that we're assuming is normal actually was transgressive and new not very long ago. And there was something transgressive and new behind that, and transgressive and new behind that. And so the thing that we're trying to protect from change was itself a product of change not that long ago. And so, yeah, I think wisdom understands that larger perspective. It subtracts your identity out of it. So it just says, hey, these are the ways that things come in, and none of them are good or bad. They're just different environments that you have to figure out how to adjust and thrive in. Some might be preferable to certain strengths or certain personality types or advantages, but like you figure it out. And that's what life is about.
So I have started many companies. Some did well, some did not do as well. I've also run many companies. I've advised many companies, and I've been involved in all aspects of the hiring process, whether sometimes I would have to hire a CEO, but sometimes software developer, sometimes designer, sometimes head of sales or business development. I've been involved in basically every aspect of running a business, and hiring is maybe the most important thing you could do when you start a business. So I'm going to give you one piece of advice, and it's related to what I'm talking about here. I used to think I was frugal because I would try to find employees as cheaply as possible, someone young, just starting out, whatever. But what I've learned is you do so much better as a business finding the best person in your field. If you want a head of sales, find the best head of sales. If you want a software developer, hire the best software developer. It ultimately will save you money, but it'll also save you so much time, so much aggravation, so much anxiety. These are all things you need to preserve. It's really important to hire correctly. When you're running a business, your mind is on your business 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's the problem with being an entrepreneur is you never leave the work at the office. So when you're hiring, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. I have found that a great hiring partner is LinkedIn Jobs. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, get qualified candidates that you can manage all in one place. And I find this is such a great platform to find people for your job because millions of people are on LinkedIn, millions of qualified people. Here's how it works. You post your job. LinkedIn's new feature helps you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people. Post your job for free, or you pay to promote it. Promoted jobs get 3 times more qualified candidates. You get qualified candidates. At the end of the day, this is the most important thing to your business is the quality of those candidates. Based on LinkedIn data, 72% of small and medium businesses using LinkedIn say that LinkedIn helps them find high quality candidates. That's good information. You share with your network. So when you're on LinkedIn, your whole business network knows you're hiring. So find out now why more than 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring today. Find your next great hire on LinkedIn. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/Altucher. That's linkedin.com/Altucher to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I wonder how much wisdom is a talent in the sense that, so I was once talking to Eric Adams, who, for better or for worse, became mayor of New York City.
Yeah.
And look, whether or not he did a good job or a bad job, who knows? There's been a lot of good mayors of New York and a lot of bad mayors, and he saw New York through a difficult time. Obviously, now he's going to be gone. This is before he was mayor. I was having this conversation with him. He was telling me how when he was like 12 or 13, I forget the exact age, 13, 14, he and his brother got severely beaten by the police. And probably, the implication was there was some racial issue
Sure.
to it. And and they were both around the same age, he and his brother, but they both reacted very differently. His brother went off to whatever. He didn't describe specifically, but up to no good.
Yeah.
And Eric went on to become, a very successful leader of Brooklyn. He became he became a policeman afterwards.
Sure.
And became an advocate for getting rid of corruption in the police. So he was very much not liked in the police because he was a policeman against all the corruption. Then he became a very successful leader of Brooklyn, then mayor of New York. And how does one person, same background, same upbringing, similar genes, one person goes one way after a horrific event and another person goes another way? And,
Sure.
and I'll argue in your book, Abraham Lincoln, you talk about a lot in this book and many other books, he comes out of the worst conditions. Many
Yeah.
people come out not Abraham Lincoln, and he comes out Abraham Lincoln. What's the difference?
Well, I think that's a great question is what lesson are you going to learn from this, right? And I was just thinking about Lincoln as you said this, like there's a version when life kicks the shit out of you, when you come from nothing, it's hard, you're having to fight to survive, the world is indifferent to you. There's a version of Abraham Lincoln's life where he becomes a self-made lawyer, and then he owns a bunch of slaves who work his plantation, and that's the source of his wealth and success. Like, that one of the reasons he was so sympathetic to slavery, he said, was that he had grown up a slave. Like, his father had worked him in the fields and beaten him and seen him as an extension of himself. And so you could just as easily, though, see not taking empathy out of that, but as a, this is how the world works, right? Somebody, the person who is hazing you at your new job or the school you just started at almost certainly was hazed, right? And so that's often how cycles go. And so the question is like, what lesson are you going to take from this experience, the right one or the wrong one? And I do think oftentimes there is a right one and a wrong one. And yeah, maybe the sort of swing vote there is wisdom.
But then how do you develop it that young? Like how is that was why I'm asking, is it a talent to be wise?
Well, I think it's a talent. I often think it's a result of the influences that you have, right? And I think one of the reasons that, like, look, maybe you have perfect parents and you're surrounded by all the right people who are able to inject right at the right moment the little bit of wisdom or guidance that you need that helps you go the right way instead of the wrong way. Hopefully you're lucky and that's who you were born with, right? But if you weren't, now it's kind of a roll of the dice. And I think what happens for someone like Lincoln is he has a bunch of parents other than his father, right? And that is the books that he was eagerly digesting. And people knew that, like, if there was a book within like a 2-day walk of the Lincoln cabin, Lincoln was going to come and get it and read it. We can trace many of the beliefs that he had down, not just to like books generally, but to like these specific kind of school books that were they were called readers back then. And it would kind of just be like a greatest hits book of quotes and passages from poetry and stories from history. Like, a bunch of Lincoln's beliefs can be traced back to like very specific books that we know he read as a kid in his log cabin. And so, I mean, I think obviously I learned some stuff from my parents, but one of the reasons that I think I went the right way when different juncture points in my life is that I'd been exposed to these great ideas in books, like some of the wisest men and women that had ever lived, some of the most impressive people who had ever lived. I was able to access their wisdom and perspective at a very early age. And so when I had experiences or pivot points in my life, I wasn't just trusting my own gut and I wasn't just relying on my dad or my mom's advice, but, you know, I was able to think about what Lincoln had done and all these other people. That is really what the power of books allow us to do, to have more than one life of experience to draw from.
And so now in I don't know what the stats are, if people are reading more every year than the year before. It almost doesn't matter to me because I sort of feel like people are probably reading less. Now,
Yes. Sure.
maybe the stats are people are reading more books, but they might, I don't know, maybe the romance novel. It just seems to me like it's natural if you have AI and nonstop inundation of text from Twitter and other places, you would read less books.
Yes.
So what's going to happen to the next generation? Which are they not going to have the opportunity to read about Lincoln? And I already noticed this, by the way, that young people have much less knowledge of the history of the areas, even areas that they love, than people our age.
No, I think about this with my kids because, like, I get it. It's like I'm trying to tell them some story from history. It's just not as interesting as a Mr. Beast video, you know, like that video, in the same way that broccoli is just not as good as some genetically engineered for taste, you know, bag of Doritos. Like, this is not a fair fight, you know? And so, yeah, I think that's a huge problem. At the same time, you know, you think about it historically, like, books have stood up pretty well over 3,000-ish years. So I think things come and go from ways. That is one thing you have a sense of in history, is just how many moments that everyone was despairing over the loss of this or that. And when you zoom out long enough, things stay relatively stable, or that there's some new equilibrium that gets reached. So I just try to think about, like with my kids at least, there's like, you know, like audiobooks are a thing that we couldn't listen to in the car when I was a kid because like it didn't exist, you know? And then later in my, early adulthood, it was hugely inconvenient because if you wanted to listen to a 300-page book, it was like 12 CDs or something, right? And now it's just like I can just pull it up on my phone, or I can do voice to text articles that I want them to hear. So I just try to actively counteract whatever the sort of, impulse of culture is. And then try to use the new technologies, whether we're talking about AI or whatever, and go, okay, how do we use this to increase, like if we just read a book or we just talked about something and now we have questions, let's get in a debate or a discussion with ChatGPT about it and see, if we agree with their take or not. And then I'm also teaching them how to use the tools at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting because at the same time, the evidence might suggest to them that the tools we have available, like the Mr. Beast video versus reading about Lincoln, are better for them because guess what? In almost every era of life, the new generation is better and smarter than us.
Yeah.
If you look at any TikTok video, they obviously play musical instruments far better than any. So many kids play the piano better than the best pianists of the 20th century ever could have possibly imagined. Like somehow or other, they are getting wisdom from the tools in front of them, even if it's not the wisdom the way we might have gotten it. Like they're getting knowledge, wisdom, skills that far surpass us. Just seems to me.
Yeah, and what I try to do is like, oh, okay, so you just watch this Mr. Beast video where he travels here. Like, let's go there. Like whenever my kids are expressing an interest in something, instead of judging it or shutting it down, I want to go towards that. Because to me, not only is that a source of connection, but again, I want to teach them this meta skill of like, curiosity is the beginning of a conversation, or it's the beginning of a process, and you don't know where it's going to end up, but it could change your life.
Well, that leads into my next thing, which is that let's say you're listening to this podcast or video or however you listen to this. Everybody thinks they're wise. I think I'm wise. You think you're wise. We all think we're wise. But setting that aside for a second, how can we practice wisdom, whether you're 5 years old or 95 years old? How can I myself practice having more wisdom?
Well, just to go to what we were just talking about, it just occurred to me, I was driving my boys to school this morning, and my son goes, I want to listen to a podcast about the history of Disneyland. Now, that's like not something I'm interested in at all, but I was like, fuck yeah, dude, like let's figure this out. And not only are we listening to it, but we're critiquing the podcast of the, it's like who's making whatever the first one I pull up on Spotify is not necessarily going to be of the highest quality. So we're not just listening to it and thinking about what we can learn, and maybe there's books or whatever, but we're also like, hey, what do we like about this? What do we dislike about this? And so I think understanding that knowledge is this conversation, like that's what they often call philosophy, the great conversation, that it's this sort of thing that goes back, that you're kind of arguing and discussing and debating with Socrates and Aristotle and Plato and Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, that's like a big part of it. I like that a lot. But I guess what I tried to build the book around was this idea that there's a handful of like just basic skills that if you can pick up, you're going to accumulate wisdom over time. Asking questions is one, reading is one, obviously travel is a big one, studying history is a big one, mentors and apprenticeships, that's a big one. So these and people might go, oh, that's so basic, everyone knows that. But I mean, to go to your point about statistics, most people don't read, right? Most people don't have a mentor. Most people stop going to school as soon as they graduate from high school or college. These are like little decisions that if you make and you practice them over the course of a life, you will get very far. And I think this is important. Like, again, wisdom isn't something you arrive at. Like if you start walking towards the horizon, you will never reach it, right? Because it doesn't actually exist. You're never going to touch it. However, you walk for an hour, then you look back behind you, you will have covered a significant amount of ground. You will know, you can objectively see that you are further along than when you started. You're never going to arrive, but you've covered distance. And so if you can pick up these kind of basic practices and you can do them day in and day out or week in or week out, you're going to end up somewhere very far from where you started. And by the way, we're all lucky in that we've started much further along than the generation before and the generation before and the generation before.
Why do you say that? Because we have more books and
Yeah.
information we have access to?
I just mean sometimes you read some of the stuff from the ancient philosophers and you go, oh, the reason we think this person's so smart is literally no one had ever thought of this before. But like we know a little bit, our baseline of knowledge is higher. It's like the standing on shoulders of giants thing.
Right. By the way, I love that question your kid asked. Can we listen to a podcast on the history of Disneyland? Because instead of just saying, so obviously he loves Disneyland. You've probably taken him there. They've had a fun time. But now he wants to know the history of it. And the history of it, by the way, is dark.
Yeah.
You know, Walt Disney wants to create this utopia, and it's both dark and playful, but it's got to be fun for kids.
Yeah.
And so understanding kind of the deeper philosophies behind the creation of Disneyland. Also, there's Disney's both failure and success as a businessman. His first one or two companies ended in bankruptcy, but he had this vision, he had this belief in animation and so on. Like, that story is an intricate, complicated, nuanced story with a lot of questions about the philosophy and so on. So this is a great topic, by the way.
Yeah, it's like, look, when you read history or biography, you pick up a biography of Walt Disney, you're learning about this man, but you're also learning about the psychology of that man. You're learning about the era that he lived in. You're learning about all the people that intersected his life. You're learning about business. You're learning about art. You're learning about management. That's the other thing I would say. I don't talk about this in the book, but I do think people don't read enough history and they don't read enough biography. They read too much either contemporary stuff or they read too much secondary stuff and not enough kind of primary deep dives into topics and people that allow them to then go off in all these different directions.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I think YouTube, there's one great benefit of YouTube, which is that if you're not a reader, there's all sorts of analysis and synopses of different periods in history. Like, I'm probably never going to read a book about World War One. I have no interest in it. But I also realized recently, I have no clue what World War One was. I have no clue. You probably have read books about it, and I have no clue what World War One was fought over. You think of World War Two, you can come up with various stories. Okay, it was fought over to stop the Holocaust from happening. It was fought over because Hitler was evil and was going to take over all Europe, and Japan was going to take over all of Asia. So we were fighting this fascism. I have no clue. I have no story or narrative at all about World War One. So, and I'm not going to read a book because I'm just not interested. But I would watch an hour-long video or even a 20-minute video just to get a sense of it and try to understand a little bit more. So there's other things now too.
No, of course. Like, you can go watch video of soldiers in World War One. That's incredible. Like the access that we now have to things. Just like basically every book that's ever been published is available. Like every video that's ever been shot is available. And that's a pretty incredible gift. I mean, the curse is that it's impossible to make your way through all of it. But I just think as a general policy, when you have that sort of flicker of interest, do you have the skills to satiate it, right? Like I know, because I know you, I know there's a bunch of things that you've been vaguely interested in that you went and figured it out, stand-up comedy, chess. You're like, oh, I'm interested in that. I want to know more. I want to give it a try. Like, it's easy to take for granted, like, knowing how to do that. And then you meet people and you realize they don't even know where or how to start with something like that.
And this is where the doing versus reading is really important. Like, you could read 24 hours a day about stand-up comedy and watch every stand-up comedian, and you'll become proficient in the way that an academic becomes proficient. But so you could argue, well, this comedian's different and this comedian has this point of view and these techniques are being used. You could say all these things, but doing something is really, really hard. Doing something hard is because it's painful. You have to I feel like there's an element of pain in wisdom because in order to avoid that pain, you got to do it again and again and again welcoming the pain, and then somehow getting to the other side of it, which is, I'm not just stand-up comedy is actually the weirdest thing to say. Oh, I experience pain over humor, but whether it's you know becoming a success in business, whether it's writing a book, as you know, writing a book is a painful experience. You have to
Sure.
do something very unnatural. You have to sit down for a year or more and type, use the skill called typing, which didn't even exist 100 years ago. After the first 500,000 years of our species' existence, there was no such thing as typing. And it's painful.
Sure.
Nobody likes doing it, but you have to do it in order to really get the nuances and the subtleties, which I guess is part of the wisdom.
Well, the subtitle of the book is Learn, Apply, Repeat, because I think these things are related. So you read about something. I was actually just reading this essay that David McCullough, the biographer, wrote. And he was talking about how he learned that the night that Truman became president, the night that FDR died, he's meeting with some senators and he gets this message that, he's needed at the White House. They don't tell him, what it is. And he has to go get his hat from his office and then head over to the White House. And he famously doesn't know why he's being called, but he feels like it's important and he just starts running. And so they know the exact way he ran to his office and then to the White House, right? And so McCullough doesn't just hear about this, he actually puts out a request to the Senate archive or something, and they allow him to retrace the steps where Truman goes. And he runs it. And he was talking about what he learned actually doing it. He was like, for instance, there's a lot more steps than I would have thought, like stairs. And he's like, it made me understand that Truman was in better shape than I would have guessed. Right? And you're like, oh, okay. So he had this little bit of knowledge and then he had to apply it. He had to go take it into the physical world. And what happened when he did that was he learned another bit of knowledge that informed what he wrote about. And then you could say that he probably also took from this, oh, it's not just enough to hear something. You have to go physically experience it where you can, because it informs the writing. And then, this is getting meta on top of meta. I'm in the middle of this biography I'm writing. I'm like, oh shit, now I have to go physically do a lot more things than I was planning on physically doing for this book. But I think McCullough's probably right here. And there's going to be things that I can't learn from books that I'm going to have to go see firsthand.
Well, and this is something, I read Bob Caro's autobiography on your recommendation, actually. It was one of the books you most recommended. I
The
forget the book
LBJ
now.
series?
No, not the LBJ series. His memoir about writing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That, for me, is his best book, actually.
Of course.
Like, I love the LBJ books. I love the Power Broker. But seeing his experiences writing the Power Broker and writing, so he moved to LBJ's. So in the book Working, he describes how he moved to LBJ's.
He moved to Johnsonville. Yeah.
Yeah, which was like the tiniest town in the world. Everyone was like a cousin of each other. And then there's him in there. And through that, he gained so much knowledge about LBJ by doing. And again, it came from your recommendation. I wouldn't have known about the book otherwise. That book was such a great book about writing and about studying history and studying people. I really loved it. But you're going to have to do this when you write about Stockdale. What are you going to do?
I know. No, I am. I've already done some of this stuff, but yeah, you're going to have to physically go and do the stuff. And it would be nice if there was a shortcut, and there are some things that can make it better. But for the most part, there's no substitute for doing the hard thing.
And I think that's why we know who McCullough and Bob Caro and Walter Isaacson, another historian, that's why we know who they are, because they've done this. They've written these books that have stood out among all the other books. Tons of books about LBJ, tons of books about Truman. But these historians have stood out in some way because of these extra things. I'm just realizing now as I talk to you about it. So that's the way to stand out, because no one else is going to run up and down the steps that Truman ran. They're just going to sit at home and ask AI, give me a bio of Truman, and I'm going to rewrite it as a biography.
Yes.
So,
No, that's exactly right. I think that some of this stuff isn't explicit. He doesn't actually tell you that he did it, but you can feel it in the writing that there's just a level of authenticity and realism to it that I don't think you can get any other way, not accurately at least.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So what made you decide Stockdale?
Well, to go to the point about growing and trying hard things, I've done my books are all different from each other, but there's, especially these last four that I just did, being part of a series, there was a formula and a style that I've gotten really good at and really comfortable with. And so I was just thinking, what's something I've never done before that I could try, that even if I fail at, I will grow as a writer and as a person for having done. And I already, I'm about maybe 30% done with the first draft right now. I could quit right now and the project would be a huge success. Not like it's not publishable, but like I have gotten much better. I've learned a bunch of stuff. I've had to figure out a bunch of stuff. I've
Like what?
changed my process. I've had to read hundreds and hundreds of letters. I've never had to, I don't use letters in my books. On my book about Peter Thiel, I had to figure out how to digest a bunch of legal documents. Well, this is the first one where I've had to do interview transcripts. I've had to do my own interviews. And then I've had to process lots of we had to go through the archives. A bunch of his archives are at Stanford. And so we've just gone through hundreds, if not thousands of pages of letters and orders and all these things. So I struggled with how to make sense of it all, and the depth that, like, this book, it's just going to be longer and harder and different than anything I've done before. And so I'm having to challenge myself, and I'm just genuinely loving it.
Yeah, like when I think of you, I think of like your biggest mentor obviously has been Robert Greene,
Mhm.
author of 48 Laws of Power, Mastery, Seduction, all these great, brilliant books. And a lot of your books have not the exact format. I would say he's very different in some ways, but a similar format where you have this theme and then historical stories and examples that ride through that theme.
Yeah.
And also you've co-written books, like your recent book with George Raveling, like just like Robert Greene with 50 Cent. So you've co-written books with others, but this is the first book. If you're writing this biography of Stockdale, I don't think Robert Greene has written a history or a biography of someone.
No, and I'm having to find new mentors, right? Because obviously Robert's a great writer. He's taught me a lot. And if I had questions, he would be very helpful. But there are things that I want to know how to do that he's not the right person for me to ask. And so not only am I sort of having to ask lots of questions to other people, but I'm even looking for like a different kind of editor, because my editors at the imprint that I'm at, they don't specialize in this kind of book either. And so I'm having to kind of adjust my team and my sort of board of advisors, if you will, to be better suited for the type of thing I'm building here.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like what are you doing? Who's your mentors in this now?
Well, I've been slowly interviewing. I interviewed Ron Chernow a couple months ago. I'm doing a thing with Doris Kearns Goodwin in California in February. I got to ask her some questions already. I'm just asking questions from people. I'm obviously reading all of their books. And then, like, I'm in the middle right now of vetting different, I'm bringing on an additional kind of editor coach, as I was saying. I could figure it out on my own, or I could try to get away with not having one. But I want to bring on someone who's worked with a bunch of writers that I would say are a caliber above me, so I can aspire to get where they are.
Right now, I think you have kind of like the ideal life. Like you're living out a couple miles outside of Austin. You've got a bookstore where when I visited, there was a lot of people there. Like it's a popular bookstore, even though it's like 30 miles outside of Austin. You do your podcast there. Then you've written these last, what is it now, like 8 books, 9, more than that, because you have kind of the summary books too. You have like 10 books or more on stoicism.
Yeah.
And obviously you've achieved a lot of success as a writer. Would you say the success you've had as a writer is more or less than the ancillary success that came from writing about stoicism? So you asked to speak at a lot of places. You're probably a consultant for a lot of places. Which has actually generated more money?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, books have sold very well, something like 10 million copies now in 30 or something
Hmm.
languages. So I could probably just live on that. I mean, I could definitely just live on the royalties at this point. But I kind of think about the books as being the entry point into the universe, and at the same time also funding other people to discover the work. So, that's what we do on social media, that's what we do on the podcast, that's what we do in YouTube. So I kind of just think about it as this like universe of stuff. So like my main thing is I like writing books. But to go to your point earlier, I understand that most of the population doesn't wake up and go, I want to read a bunch of books today, right? Like it just doesn't fit well in their life. And so I try to translate what I do into these other mediums, just in the same way that the books get translated into other languages. Um, so I kind of think about it as all like feeding into the same place. Um, the nice part about speaking or consulting and other things is that a video is free for everyone. A speech is usually paid for by, 0.0001% of the population that is, like I spoke to this large company yesterday, like to that this large parent company that is, has, I don't know, it's like 100,000 employees. So I spoke to just 30 CEOs inside that parent company, right? And so obviously they're able to pay a lot of money because, they have billions of dollars in revenue. And that's able for me to fund a lot of the other stuff that I do because it allows me to give away a lot of stuff for free, I guess is what I'm saying.
I see. So it's all, you don't really separate it out as sources of income. It's all part of the same machine.
Yeah, it's the basic marketing funnel, which you know all about. The purpose of all of it is to make more stuff. I remember Casey Neistat said that to me once. He was like, we don't make stuff to make money, we make money to make stuff. That's what an artist does. And that's kind of how I think about it.
I love that quote. And that quote is very Casey Neistat.
Yes.
And like, okay, so what he's an interesting case that I don't really hear as much about him now as I did 10 years ago.
Sure.
And so obviously everyone's, well, including my own, like everyone's career arc is different. What's Casey doing now?
You
And
know,
he's been
when
on my podcast twice, but not in the past 10 years.
I was just in New York doing the launch of Wisdom, and we went for a run across the Brooklyn Bridge at like 6 in the morning. It was lovely. It's interesting that you say you haven't heard from him in a while. I bet if you pulled up like his YouTube feed, you'd be like, wow, these things are doing more views than ever, which is exactly, I think, the point that we opened with, which is like, it feels like the field is much, much bigger. So it's harder to keep track of everyone, but also the audience is much, much bigger. So you could not be getting the same share of attention, but actually be doing better than you've ever done before. And so I think,
Yeah.
as far as I know, his stuff is still crushing and it's great. I watch it when I can, but it's just not like the internet is not this small town that it was for a short period of time.
Yeah. Well, look, Ryan Holiday, I think this must be like at least the 15th or 16th time you've been on the podcast. Because I know you're on the podcast for every single book ever since the beginning. And you've also come on a whole bunch of other times whenever we've just wanted to chat. Basically, every time we wanted to have a conversation, I would say, let's just put it on the podcast. We very rarely had a conversation outside of the podcast.
Well, I think that's a function of one, you having one of the longest running podcasts that I know about. Two, I've written way too many books. And then three, you've been very good to me and you've invited me on every time. So I appreciate that. But yeah, it's funny. It's like we have these 2 hour conversations every year or two. And then I don't think we've ever just chatted on the phone.
Yeah. We've had dinner once or twice.
I think we've gone out a number of times, but yes, podcasts, I don't know about you, but they've replaced a chunk of like, let's grab coffee and catch up. I tend to find that happens over podcasts in a way that's good because you end up having really deep conversations that you might not have had in real life. At the same time, there's probably personal stuff that doesn't get discussed because it's being recorded that it would be good to talk to people about that I don't probably do enough of.
Yeah, agreed. For me as well. And maybe that'll change someday. Maybe we'll have to grab coffee and just like talk about bullshit stuff sometime.
Yeah, I
But
would love that.
yeah. Well, Ryan, wisdom takes work. Learn, apply, repeat. Another great book in the series, and this is the end of the series of the Four Virtues. So
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to the Stockdale book. I've been curious about Stockdale, honestly, ever since probably about 1980. I was
Yeah.
12 years old, and I read Jimmy Carter's autobiography.
Yeah.
I think it was Why Not the Best? And that quote comes from Stockdale. So I've been curious about
No,
Stockdale
no,
ever since.
that quote is from Admiral Rickover.
Ah,
But
my fault completely.
but this is something I mean I vaguely knew about it, but what I'm writing about, Stockdale and Carter are at the Naval Academy at the same time. They're they're living in the dorms right next to each other.
I didn't know that.
It's this interesting intersection of lives, which I've been fascinated to dive into.
Okay, so how do I know about Stockdale? I guess he was Ross Perot's running mate, right?
That's when he famously was introduced to the American public. Well, I mean, he was famously introduced to the American public as a POW and he won the Medal of Honor. But it was this kind of second act to his career and it went very badly. And I haven't gotten there yet. But it's an interesting wrinkle on this incredible life that then we sort of humiliate him on the public stage instead of venerating him the way that we should have.
Well, look, I look forward to hearing more about him after I read the book and have you on the podcast again.
Well, as soon as I finish it, I'll let you know.
Thanks again, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.